Okay, so I did a report on Assembly Bill 537, and it is also known as California Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act of 2000. And assembly bills are a little bit complex and confusing, but they are like additions and renditions to different laws, federal laws that already exist. And so I will go into detail about this bill. So, this law, for the most part, created or is a law that prohibits discrimination and harassment on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in California public schools. So, our book goes just to give you guys a little bit of background on the importance of LGBTQ students and their protection. There was a study that was done several years ago, I think in 2011, on 6,000 LGBTQ identified students, and 85% of those interviewed reported that they were verbally harassed, and 38% were physically harassed at school based on their sexual orientation. And then also, sadly, 30% of them skipped a day of school in the past month because they felt unsafe at their school campuses. So obviously this topic is incredibly important, and the fact that California made renditions to the laws is just shows the importance of it. This law, AB 537, changed California's education code by adding the actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity to the existing non discrimination policy. So I'll go over the one that's federally recognized, and then the new one that California um, made based on AB 537. This bill also uh, expanded the definition of gender, which is important, and it protects all school programs. And I'll go into detail more with what all entails. So, the existing law discriminatory laws that are federally recognized prohibits a person from being subject to discrimination based on sex, ethnic group, race, national origin, religion, color, and or mental or physical disability. So what 537 did was that it added that California prohibits discrimination and harassment and intimidation or bullying. So they expanded those to not just say discrimination. And based on a student's actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity, expression of gender, race, ethnicity, so everything else that's federally recognized, but this bill also added actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. This law expands the definition of gender and states that gender means sex and includes a person's identity, gender related appearance, behavior, or whether or not they're stereotypically associated with the person's assigned sex at birth. So previously, gender was just based on the biological sex. So, what this bill does, or who this bill protects, are students and school employees, and it protects them against discrimination and harassment at any schools, any California public schools, and any other schools receiving state funding except religious schools. And it also expands, in protection of these students, it protects their rights to start any program or activity in school, including any extracurricular activities or clubs. And I'll go into detail more about the major two ones that we're talking about here. I think it's important that we understand just understand what discrimination looks like based on sexual orientation or gender identity on a school campus. So we could see this by refusing a same-sex couple to attend a prom or any sort of extra like event, because the partner has to be male and female. Like, no, this law, that would define that as discrimination. Or if we thought that, or if an employee, a school staff treats a same-sex couple differently when they're showing emotion or expressing affection towards each other than a regular heterosexual couple, and refusing to allow a student to wear any sort of clothing based on their gender identity. So those would all be examples of discrimination. This law defines harassment to be conduct based on protected status that is severe or pervasive, which unreasonably disrupts an individual's educational or work environment or creates a hostile environment. So we can see this in different types of verbal harassment, which whether it's name calling or physical, if it's physical threats of violence based on a student's perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. So coming back to what this law protects, aside from students and school employees, it also protects and covers any program in school. If the school already allows voluntary or non-curricular student-initiated clubs, it must allow that all clubs meet. So every single club has rights under the Federal Equal Access Act, but California provides additional protection under this law for clubs such as gender or GSAs, which stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance. They're previously known as Gay Straight Alliance Club, but they've decided to expand their name to encompass more people, and other LGBTQ related clubs. So this law states that these clubs in these two categories have equal funding, equal privileges, equal locations to meet. So you can really advocate for these clubs based on what this law provides. And these clubs are really student-run clubs that are typically in high school or middle school, and they just provide a safe place for students to meet and support each other and talk about issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity expression, and work to end homophobia and transphobia. And as we'll see in the next couple slides, part of this law entails ensuring that people are educated about these different LGBTQ communities. And so having these clubs on campus is a really positive, important way to combat anti-LGBTQ harassment. And again, will just help the school fulfill its legal obligation to ensure a safe environment for all students. So what it looks like, enforcing Assembly Bill 537, the first point isn't that every school has an anti-harassment policy. So this policy must include all of the aforementioned, different categories where discrimination harassment can occur, but it must also include actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. So the schools need to inform students and parents about the rules of conduct and actually enforce them, and have to lay out explicitly procedures for responding to complaints made under this policy. And it was interesting, or kind of sad still, in our book it shared that 59% of schools with these policies, these anti-harassment policies in place, those students still hear homophobic remarks on a frequently or often basis. However, 59% is better than the 75% of students that hear these comments on the regular in schools that only have generic policies that don't encompass the anti-harassment policies for actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity. So part of that is updating the filing complaint forms. We have to make sure that for each school So if a student feels that they have been harassed based on this, they can file a complaint form that looks kind of similar to the sexual harassment complaint, but this new form must include, based on this bill, must include the expanded definition of gender and include an area to report harassment for sexual orientation. So if it doesn't, then you're going against the law. Your school is. And in addition, this bill also enforces that the school staff are provided training um, to know how to best prevent and respond to these forms of harassment. So I found that these sites were extremely helpful for as tools for us to use as school counselors. The first one was the Guide for California School Officials, and it just listed different questions and answers to make sure that we are in line with the laws that are laid out that this bill laid out in California for safety and violence prevention for LGBTQ students. And the next one was the GSLN programs. This is like an advocate, kind of like a network. It's a way in which offers like a million different ways for your community and schools to engage and collaborate together for national events. Like there's a day of silence or year-round programs, field trips, changing the game. So different ideas, I guess. And our book also provided that, which was good. The next one was the GSA network, which offers a lot of information on how different steps for starting a GSA at your school, fundraising opportunities, exactly, what it entails, and just different ideas for meetings. And then the fourth one was something that would be really, I think, helpful to give our students was the New York Times interactive coming out stories. So it's a platform for your students who are struggling in this area to just have like real life resources and people to connect with and hear about their stories of coming out. So I just thought that these were four nice tools that we could use with our kiddos. And lastly is my resource slide. So you can, once I post the Blackboard, you guys can, click each of these live links and be able to explore more on AB 537. All right, thank you.